when you always ask executives whether they want to be data-driven or not, the vast majority would always say yes, right? And year over year, when you ask them about, have you had some success when you're implementing a data strategy into a data platform, almost 60% would say yes, and this number keeps growing year over year. But the thing is, or the next interesting question is, what are the challenges that's facing you from becoming a data-driven organization? And when you're asked about whether it's people or is it technology, the vast majority would say people. But before I continue, I want just like a show of hands. Who thinks it's actually people that is the main challenge, like people trust? All right. And the other way around, who thinks it's technology? All right. So, like, mostly people think that technology is there. It's just how we are dealing with it as people in order to get a successful data strategy. But in order for us to dive deeper into that sentiment, let's actually meet the people. On one side, we have our traditional or the most familiar stakeholder, Buzz from business. Buzz represents our data analyst and also represents our data literate communities at our organization. He's usually looking at aggregates of data, trying to understand some strategic insights about their line of business or the whole organization. They might do some slicing and dicing of the data or doing what-if analysis. And mostly they're looking at the data from the lens of their business intelligence tools. On the other hand, we have Tony. Tony represents a data architect or is a data engineer. Tony is helping Buzz realize those experiences on the data platform. And when he's not helping Buzz build those data platforms, he's actually helping others build digital data-driven experiences, like the one, for example, you would provide your customer to tell them what's the next best action, what's a recommendation that they can take. He's powering all those experiences for all the stakeholders. His tools are mostly data-centric driven tools that are designed to help him build data integrations and data platforms. But at the heart of all of these experiences is Barbara. Barbara represents our data science team. She represents our organization's desire to not just look at the back mirror and understand what happened, but also looking into the future. Barbara uses her machine learning tool set, like, for example, a notebook initially, but as she would want to productionalize predictive insights and make use of those in digital experiences or, for example, in insightful business analytics dashboards, she would want to use more of a data-driven tool chain that would allow her to do ML ops, for example. Now, stop me if you've heard this scenario before, but Buzz from business wants now to realize something innovative or tries to do some predictive insights. So he goes to Barbara and says, Barbara, I know that you are our new data scientist. I have some invoice data, and I want to predict whether I'm going to have a free cash flow problem in the next 2 or 3 quarters. And I know that you love working with spreadsheets. I've seen you doing that a lot. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to export our database into a spreadsheet. I'm going to hand it over to you. Barbara doesn't like this, right? Because Barbara's access to the data or the data patterns is very different from Buzz. Where Buzz is looking at aggregates, Barbara wants to predict things that are going to happen. So what she wants to do is establish patterns in the data. And if the data has a narrow context, she's going to predict trivial kind of patterns. So she wants a wider context of data, integrated data. For example, she doesn't want to look just at invoices. She also wants to look at, for example, how the people that are paying those invoices are, like their financial statements look like, what is the economic situation, all these kind of things, revenue. She wants to integrate that context. So in order so that patterns are not trivial anymore, they are meaningful patterns. She also wants to make sure that those patterns are repeatable. So she wants to look at a history of data. So Barbara doesn't really have a very good use for that spreadsheet that she has right now. But Tony overhears the conversation and says, you know what? I have some things that might help you. Tony has been building a data platform that's enabling those kind of experiences for Buzz. And so he tells Barbara, you know what? He has been also onboarding all this kind of data that you need, so I'm going to onboard you to that system. He's also going to try to onboard people that are building digital experiences as well. But because the data access patterns are different, Barbara doesn't find what she wants there. So she tells Tony to please onboard more data to the data platform. Now, what Tony is going to do is that he's going to try to do that. But as those data sources increase, and as the time goes by, Tony feels the burn of being stressed. And if there is something that you should not underestimate, is the power of a spreadsheet or a notebook in the hands of a data scientist or someone who's building digital native experiences. Because they're going to find their way into actually going to the actual data sources and getting the data from there. Tony has built a lot of compliance rules in his data platform. But now he finds people just going around him and just like getting the data from whatever they want because they need the data. Tony is sad. And there is something else that happened. Barbara got her data, but she found out that every time she's getting the data, she's putting a different spin on understanding the data. And everyone else has been putting their own spin and interpretation of the data as well. She finds out that she has been actually not finding a consistent insights compared to what everyone else has been driving out of their own kind of experiences. Barbara becomes sad as well. Now let's go to the last stakeholder, right? Our Buzz from business. He also becomes sad because what he asked for is something that he thought is going to take weeks. It's now taking months, and now people are communicating to him that probably it might not come ever. So to summarize the problems that we face from a data strategy level, if we go like higher up with our view, the first problems that we see is actually compliance, bypassing compliance. And this manifests itself into leadership actually very stressful about waking up in the middle of the night, of whether everyone has been handling the data correctly or in a compliant way. And what they don't want to see is that they don't want to see in the morning a hefty fine on the organization. Or worse, the organization making it to the news for all the wrong reasons. The second thing is that's going to manifest itself into multiple notebooks or scripts that have different ways of accessing the data. And that's going to manifest itself in terms of leadership, worrying that they're looking at a certain dashboard, but looking at a very similar dashboard that's showing the same thing, but when they are aggregating the numbers, it's not the same numbers. And that's the things that I'm going to call split brains. The final challenge is, let's say that leadership decides to restrict data access from everyone. But that's now going to put brakes on innovation that we have been driving with the organization. That's a fear of missing out on opportunity. So we need to find a way to actually balance out all these things. Luckily, we have a formula for going forward. This formula actually goes through those three pillars. By modernizing your data platforms, you're able to use innovations in automation to actually build in compliance at your data sources, at your various means and patterns of accessing the data. And by also doing that, you find ways of actually onboarding the data into your strategic data platforms in a way that enables you to actually unify the data and get rid of this split brains issue, because everyone now has a consistent view on what the data means. Finally, by doing that, you're actually enabling everyone to have access to the data and start like looking at what innovations they can provide and what kind of things that they can reinvent. Going with that, now I welcome Kamal. He's the head of data and digital capability architecture at Merck Darmstadt, and he's going to introduce us the data platform.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, John, for the introductions. I'm super grateful having this opportunity today on behalf of Merck to talk a little bit about our journey when it comes to data and analytics. Most of you probably know Merck as a pharmaceutical company, but in reality, we are way, way more broader than that. We have 60,000 employees, we have 70 billion market cap, we have hundreds of labs all across the world, and we have three very, very distinct business sectors. The first being life sciences, where we tackle some of the world's toughest problems with some of the most brilliant scientists. Problems like genomics, problems like protein sequencing, and problems like life extension. We also have a healthcare sector where we deliver some of the world's most effective drugs when it comes to cancer therapies or diabetes. We also have an electronics sector where we deliver innovations in the space of automotive solutions, semiconductor solutions, and building solutions, as well as display solutions. So in reality, we really like to think ourselves a bit more as a technology and innovation company. And what we tend to do is we tend to innovate in one area of our business and bring that innovation all across to create breakthroughs. And hopefully, these breakthroughs improve the lives of everyone everywhere on this planet. Unfortunately, back in 2020, our data and analytics landscape was pretty immature. We had a plethora of on-prem systems and very limited to no cloud capability with very limited budget there as well. This meant that Barbara, Buzz, and Tony, on average, had 6 months to be able to start their use cases. This also meant that they had to go through a minefield of processes and selection processes to select the tools that they wanted to use for their use cases. In most cases, Barbara, Buzz, and Tony ended up introducing their own tools to our ecosystem, adding to the complexity and creating shadow IT organizations. Thankfully, the powers that be heard Barbara, Buzz, and Tony, and they decided to invest heavily in leveling up Merck's data and analytics landscape. The first thing they did is they created a central data organization that had very strong footholds in all the different business sectors and was closely tied to IT. This meant, like a very close colleague of mine once said, everyone had a seat on the table. We had a democratic process where everyone collaborated and was able to bring their ideas to the table. So some of the things that we were able to achieve in a very short period of time is, one, removing the elusiveness and the vagueness in our ecosystem. We were able to consolidate all these tools into a specific set of ideally SaaS tools that limited the operational overhead that we had as a company. We also delivered best practice and extremely high quality documentation to our use case teams to enable them so that they understood how the tools talk to each other, but also talk to the outside world and the inside world that is Merck. We also federated responsibility as much as possible, leveraging the use case teams and giving them ownership of the use cases they are driving. And we did this by putting in place security and compliance services as well as governance services that tools like AWS could provide us. Things like AWS Control Tower, guardrails, and global policies. We also automated everywhere, anywhere we could, from instantiating the use case on our use case portal to delivering the environments that we had for our use case teams on AWS. That included things like routing, transit gateway attachments, configurations, virtual networks, everything the use case teams needed just to get started. In my honest opinion, though, the one thing that helped us the most is the people that were involved in this process. We looked for the diamonds in the rough in our organization, and when we found them, we nurtured them. And when we went externally to find additional manpower, we didn't just look at technical capabilities and the ability to execute. but we also looked at what drove them, at their creativity, at their mindset, and that they had the same vision as we did. Some of the best work in our organization came from fresh graduates who brought in fresh ideas into our organization. And when we looked for external partners, we looked for the Navy SEALs. We looked for AWS ProServe. We looked for Unit 8. And those were tactical partners that allowed us to execute our plan very, very efficiently and effectively. And this is where we stand today. Buzz, Barbara, and Tony have went from a 6-month wait time to a couple of days to get their use cases up and running. Our stack is a 3-stack solution, offering Palantir Foundry as a self-service tool, as well as the capability to host medium to low complexity use cases. Snowflake, mostly for structured data analytics, as well as AWS, where all the magic really happens, and our very high complexity use cases take place. It's probably worth noting that this entire stack is all underpinned by AWS. And that really helps us because it means this stack can talk to each other really, really well. All these tools and services are very tightly knit and very tightly integrated. I'd now like to leave you with my colleague Florian Monard, who is going to be discussing about all the different tools and capabilities we have developed in this stack to support our use case teams, as well as some pretty cool use cases we have developed on the stack. Thank you very much for your time.
Hello, everyone. I'm Florian, and I'm the product owner of our AWS-based data analytics platform. And I'm super excited to be with you today. And my job in a nutshell at Merck is to make all the Buzzes, Tonys, and Barbaras more happy and more successful when they work with data at Merck. And today I want to talk about how we use the principles of frictionless access, automated customization, and scalable compliance in our data platform. By now, you all know Buzz, Tony, and Barbara, and they all work at Merck. And typically at Merck, Buzz comes up with an idea to improve a product or to streamline a process using data-driven methods. And a lot of that data that the use case teams at Merck need to make that business impact sits within on-premise data sources at Merck. So a lot of the data sits in the Merck network in different sources across the business. And Buzz, Tony, and Barbara all want some sort of access to that data to fulfill their big visions in terms of business impact. And all of them have different skill sets and different access pattern to analyze and use that data effectively. So a lot of the data that we have at Merck and that is useful for data analytics already sits in our, let's call them here, data accounts. So this is mostly our AWS Data Hub and Palantir Foundry, our SaaS-based data analytics solution. And what we have done in order to enable our 3 friends here is we've built a data platform experience. And we've built multiple experiences around these personas to enable them to work with data effectively. And we call those consumption experiences, those different experiences that we built. And now we're going to explain them to you first on a high level. So the first one is our builder environments. Builder environments are really a one-stop shop to build any custom data analytics application at Merck that can scale to hundreds or even thousands of internal and external users. And this is really great especially for Buzz and Tony. Secondly, we've built our data labs. So the data labs are really ready-to-use self-serve analytics workbenches that directly connect to data. And Barbara can use them to run any ad hoc analyses on data and to also train, for example, a machine learning model and test her ideas. The third consumption experience is our easy-to-use app service. So the app service is really about a hosting service for container-based data analytics applications. And this is also really great for Barbara because as a data scientist, she would like to iterate quickly and show her modeling and analytics results to a group of end users. And she doesn't want to do all the heavy lifting of bringing things into production. And she also doesn't want to bother Tony all the time. So the app service really allows her to build her own custom data analytics apps. Let me go into a bit more detail now about these consumption experiences, what they actually are. So the builder environments are really the main workhorse. We spin up one builder environment for each larger data analytics use case. And in these builder environments, the use case team can spin up any AWS service they want using CI/CD and infrastructure as code pipelines. And typically, within those builder environments, data is processed, and there's usually also some direct impact on a business process or a UI that is hosted on there. We also have our data labs. So the data labs, we have one data lab that consists of one AWS account per business sector. And in these AWS accounts, users can find SageMaker notebooks, different EC2 instances, GPU or CPU-based instances that they can choose and spin up in a self-service way. So there's no one blocking them. They have direct access and can spin them up. They can also spin up managed RStudio instances. And within those data labs, they can directly access the data in our data hub, but also in our SaaS applications like Palantir Foundry. And the app service, basically, so Barbara, as a data scientist, what she really likes to do is to use open source application frameworks like Streamlit or RShiny. And to host these, she first builds them locally, but then if she wants to expose them to a group of end users, what the app service offers is it uses AWS ECS, so Elastic Container Service, and AWS Fargate, which is just serverless compute service for containers, to host these applications. And how it works, the app service has a UI that people like Barbara can enter, and they just have to choose the app framework they want to work with, so for example Streamlit, and also the amount of compute and storage they need. And then the app service spins up an application for them on the fly that already runs and can be accessed by users. And the only thing Barbara has to do is to change the container code itself, so basically her custom application code that might be, for example, in Python. So as I said, the builder environments are really the main workhorse and also connect and power other services like the app service. And let's take a deeper look now at the builder environments because they're really important. So as I said, so builder environments, we spin up one of them per use case, and they usually consist of 3 AWS accounts, one for dev, one for QA, so testing, and one for production. We can also use builder environments at Merck for GXP use cases. I'll talk a little bit about that later. So there might be a builder environment for a GXP use case shown here on the left. And what makes the builder environment special is that we actually customize them based on the business context. So what this means is that each data analytics use case has specific requirements, and those requirements are taken into account when we spin up those builder environments. So there are 3 different levels of customization that you can think of. So one is the networking or access patterns. So each builder environment comes with their own VPCs and subnets, and they are connected to our central transit gateway. And this connectivity allows then, for example, direct connectivity to some raw data sources sitting on premise. It, for example, also allows direct connectivity to different data SaaS solutions we have, like Snowflake or Palantir Foundry. And it also allows access to the internet if required by the use case. Another way of customizing these is based on security. So you can imagine different use cases have different type of access roles that they need. So use case teams can customize their own roles for these builder environments that their teams need to access. We also have some central service control policies in place that govern all these builder environments for all the different use cases at Merck to ensure that the teams are bounded by some central governance rules that we put in place. Another way to customize these is developer tooling. So each use case team might prefer a different code repository tooling. Some use cases might need more complex, pre-configured CI/CD pipelines, while others might want to have access to a central library of infrastructure as code components, and all that can be customized towards the use case. So imagine now if we have 50 plus of these builder environments, and we need to configure them. When we started and launched the platform a bit more than a year ago, we really saw that our DevOps team was struggling because there's a lot of work to spin these up and customize them for each use case. So what we came up with is what we call automated customization. So what we did, we really automated the creation of these builder environments. Let me show you how that works. So at Merck, we have a central, we call it Palantir use case portal. And in this use case portal, all data analytics initiatives at Merck are centrally cataloged. So business teams who want to build a data analytics use case come in, provide and present their business context of their use case, and also bring all the technical details that they think are relevant for this use case. And working together with their sector data office at Merck, they fill out the technical details required in this use case portal. And that makes all the data analytics initiatives at Merck searchable, which is great. So we have hundreds of use case ideas in there, and many of them already running in production. When a use case team has filled the entry in the portal, a JSON file gets exported to an S3 bucket. And this creates a use case creation event on our platform. And this triggers a few Lambda functions that then pass the JSON file about all the technical details about the use case and create a few pipelines that then run CDK scripts inside of them to customize these builder environments. So for example, as a first step, these AWS accounts of these builder environments are created using AWS Control Tower. And then another pipeline configures all the networking that I described on the builder environments. Yet another pipeline then creates a separate CI/CD and code repository project for the use case and creates pre-built pipelines so that the use case team can directly deploy from those pipelines to their builder environment. Finally, the whole process of creating these builder environments is visible and tracked in a DynamoDB, so stakeholders are being informed of how their builder environment creation is going. And right in the end, when everything is ready, there's an email notification using Amazon's simple email service, and use case teams know, okay, we are all set, we can start building now, our build environment is there. So this really helped us to reduce the time it takes from the use case idea until the use case teams can start working at Merck. And now we have over 100 of these builder environments in place, so how do we govern them? How do we ensure compliance? So that's the question that we answer next, so how do we scale compliance? So when you think about scaling compliance, there are also different levels of how you can think about it. And one level is the network access level. So let's imagine here another consumption experience account like a builder environment. And then what we typically do, we connect it to our central transit gateway. And AWS Transit Gateway is really the scalable routing technology. And with that, we can connect the builder environment to anything really that is required. So for example, we can connect it directly to the Merck on-premise system, to a source system. We can connect the builder environment to our data hub accounts. And we can also make sure the builder environment has access to the internet. We have a shared services account where all the internet traffic flows through. We have a central firewall in place there that monitors all the traffic going out of the platform. And then finally, we also use AWS Private Link here to connect to our SaaS solutions that are also on AWS. For example, Palantir Foundry or Snowflake. Another level of thinking about scaling compliance is data access. So let's zoom a little bit into actually our data hub on AWS. But first think about, so we are talking about these on-premise data sources. And use case teams that need this data can leverage our ingestion stacks. So each team can get their own ingestion stack that mostly consists of AWS Glue, which is a serverless data integration technology. And then that data can land in our AWS Data Hub. And in the Data Hub, how do we think about the different levels of data? So these builder environments, like the one on top, connects to the data, but it needs to connect to specific data. So there are different ways of splitting up the data. So what we came up with is we have dev, QA, and prod data as a first level of segregation. And then we distinguish on a bucket level between GXP and non-GXP data, staging and integrated data. So those are all different buckets here. So staging data being really the raw data that lands on the platform, and integrated data being the end product, like a data product, and some clean data in between as well in staging. Lastly, we also have our data accounts that are sitting in the SaaS solutions. So for example, we have a lot of data on Palantir Foundry that can directly be consumed as well from the consumption experience accounts. So this is how we think about different data access pattern. Lastly, I promised you I will also talk a little bit about GXP. So for those of you who are not in a pharma life science, who are not working in the pharma life science sector, GXP stands for example, good clinical practice, good manufacturing practice, and GXP are really a number of regulations and best practices to follow when you use software and infrastructure in a business context that is GXP relevant. So you can think, for example, when we develop a new drug, you have to do clinical testing of these medications. And if you want to use data and analytics within those regulated business contexts like clinical development, then you'll have to ensure that all your software and infrastructure is GXP qualified. And we at Merck, in the Merck Data Office, we offer these builder environments in a GXP qualified way. So we give already the teams that need to start building a baseline that is qualified, and then they can continue working on that. So let me walk you through that, how we do that on a high level. So when you think about GXP, GXP always starts with some change. So imagine, for example, we have an AWS account with a specific networking setup in there, and then we want to make a change to that networking setup. So that would be a change that we would need to qualify in GXP. And as a next step, we would think about, okay, when we do that change, how would the new production setup would look like? So this is what we call expected values. So we think about what do we expect to find when we do this deployment into production. And we track this in an expected value sheet that we upload to a compliance tool at Merck. And then once it gets approved, we can deploy the change into production. And after we deploy the change to production, we actually, to complete the GXP qualification, need to prove that we have everything under control, and we basically know exactly. We can prove that what we wanted to deploy and what was approved to go into production is actually what we find also after deployment. So this is where a handy tool comes in that we call RapidQ. And we developed this together with AWS ProServe. And so what it does in a nutshell is that we upload those expected values to our GXP shared services account, and then we have a few Lambda functions that pass the information in that expected value sheet, and then go to the target account that you want to qualify, and then check if the desired expected parameters and infrastructure can be found there. And then what RapidQ does, it basically automates the creation of the qualification report in the end that you need to show, okay, what we approved went actually into production. And so in the end of this process, we get out the qualification report as a PDF and can prove to our compliance team, okay, hey, actually what we want to deploy into production is there and is controlled. Okay, now we talked a lot about the infrastructure and data infrastructure we create for our use case teams, but now I want to also show you one example use case at Merck and how this technology manifests itself. Okay, so at Merck we have a team that focuses on natural language processing, so it's text analytics team. And what they've been doing over the past years is to find all the valuable text data at Merck and create data assets around them. So there are many text-based data assets about, for example, customer patient data inquiry data sets, patient experience data sets, and also a lot of data sets in the finance sectors, so basically in the finance group, so invoices and other text-based information. And the natural language processing team at Merck has built a central consumption experience around all the text data. So they've built a central hub of NLP models that other use case teams can use in their use cases. So this NLP experience as a service, as we call it here, starts very simple. So all the text data can be used in our data labs to train machine learning models. For example, to classify some invoices. So you might imagine we have a machine learning model there. And then what the NLP team has done, they've built this NLP builder environment here that leverages AWS ECS and Fargate to essentially host those models that are trained in Data Lab and offer them as an API. And this central hub for APIs does not just use the models we train ourselves at Merck, but also has models that AWS provides. So for example, from AWS TextTrack, different OCR technologies, and most recently we added OpenAI's GPT-3 and GPT-4 APIs there to enable other use case teams to leverage these models in their use cases. And as you can see here, so there are many different API consumers that are mostly also other builder environments, but also our SaaS data analytics platform, Palantir Foundry, can access those model APIs. And also in the app service that I explained to you, these model APIs can be leveraged. Okay, now let me show you one team that made use of these NLP APIs. So in finance at Merck, we have to submit a lot of documents to the German Federal Bank, and we need to make sure that the documents we submit to them are classified in the right category. Mistakes of classifying these documents into wrong category can be costly. So there's a lot of different categories, and it's a lot of manual effort. So what the Group Functions Data Office at Merck came up with is to automate this process and to enable faster classification and less errors. So what they did is they first ingested these mostly invoice-based data to our AWS Data Hub, and then they leveraged the consumption experience that I showed you on the last slide, the NLP services, to build a custom model on SageMaker, train that model, and then move it into the API hosting builder environment that I showed you. So now this model to classify these invoices is offered as an API in the builder environments and can be consumed by other builder environments. So now they've created this builder environment for invoice processing, and in there, they leverage the model that they trained, but also other models from the API hub. So, for example, a model to do optical character recognition on those invoices. And then in the builder environment, they build a custom web app that can access those APIs, and users can upload invoices to have them classified. So this is a really cool example because it shows that these builder environments really build on top of each other, and we have a lot of teams that work together on these. Now, I also want to look a little bit into the future. What do we want to achieve this year and the years beyond? So, most importantly, we know it's a journey. We are a product-driven organization. We think of our data platform as a product that needs to constantly be involved, and we want to build more of these consumption experiences for different teams at Merck so that everybody at Merck has the right tooling at their hands to innovate with data. And it's important for us to make these experiences as frictionless as possible. We also want to upskill our builders across the different sectors. We want to enable them to leverage and build cloud-native applications on the builder environments. One other goal for us is to bring more automated GXP compliance at Merck. So we want to bring the GXP compliance to the next level and make sure it's even more automated. We also work on additional data products. So right now we're working on cloud data warehousing using Snowflake, and we want to also build consumption experiences for the users of Snowflake. Another topic that we constantly think about is data governance and discoverability. So that's a topic we also focus on this year a lot. Okay, now lastly, and most importantly, I want to thank the amazing team behind all of this. And there's just a few here, but there's many people that worked on this, and without them, this all would not exist. And that also brings me to the end of my part. John, over to you again for closing the session.
So, just to recap, thinking about those pillars when you're talking about your data strategy, that's something that's going to lead you to success, especially frictionless access to data. But then I want to show you something next. You probably have seen that in the architecture multiple times, but I want you to actually look at how this looks like here. It might look at like a traditional data lake, but you can actually leverage the layers in the data lake strategically to enable certain people to access, or certain roles to access the data in a certain way that makes sense to them. If you first start ingesting the data in your staging layer, that's a place where you're going to make your data storage very cost effective. But moving forward from there, you can provide multiple consumption experiences. And I want you to think of those not just as data marts, but also customized laser-focused experiences that caters to the needs of the roles that want to consume the data. It obeys their service level objectives and service level SLAs in general. But if there is something that we hate more than fragmented data, is actually doing cleansing and transformation over and over again. And that's why we need to have some integrated layer where we put the data there in a way that we can build multiple consumption experiences out of. But the thing that's most important is that because we're going to build multiple experiences, multiple consumption experiences, this puts a lot of emphasis on this integrated layer being open and interoperable, where everyone can start discovering this layer and start building different consumption experiences out of that. This way, with this integrated platform that's going to bring your analytics next to machine learning and databases as well, this is a way to actually make your Barbaras, Buzz, and Tonys happy at the end. So one last thing, we will be right there if you have any other questions. If you still have further questions, you can visit us at the AWS Data Strategy booth. Also, you can check out the links for additional details about the use case. And also, if you want to get started with building your own AWS landing zone, you can also check out the link where you can start building a specialized experience of the landing zone, especially for healthcare life sciences customers. With that, I would like only to say one final thing. We are very data-driven. So if you didn't download the AWS Events app, please do. Provide us feedback, and let us know in the feedback if you want to talk about any different or any additional data topics as well. Thank you, and yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.